Welcome to Boring Historians, the channel where history drifts into dreams, a place where history unfolds like an old woolen blanket, warm, heavy, and just a little scratchy. Tonight, our candle will burn low as we wander, very, very slowly, through the winding lanes of medieval sanitation and hygiene. This story will not thrill you. It will not rush. It will trickle like a leaky cistern, drop by drop. So breathe in, let the day fade, and let us begin. Welcome, sleepy wanderer. Tonight, we step quietly into the past, to a world of stone castles, velvet gowns, whispered promises, and long-forgotten prayers. If this tale brings you comfort, consider gently tapping the like and subscribe button, more quiet journeys through time. Now breathe slowly, settle in, and let us begin our story. Before plumbing, before porcelain, before sewer grates hummed beneath our streets, there was mud and straw, and the deeply human hope that waste, once out of sight, would simply vanish. In the early medieval period, roughly the 5th to 10th centuries, the fall of Rome left sanitation systems in disrepair. The aqueducts no longer flowed. The sewers of cities like Londinium fell into disuse, and so humanity turned again to the earth. Houses had no dedicated latrines. Waste was deposited in pits or in the woods. In smaller villages, there was a kind of organic rhythm to things. Animals fertilized fields. People dug shallow holes. There was no stigma around smells, no obsession with sterility. The nose became tolerant. The hands grew tough. And the world, at least by modern standards, was gloriously unbothered by grime. Let us pause now and imagine that quiet rural home. A hearth, a wooden bench, and the ever-present aroma of livestock, weaving through the thatch like a memory. Clean water was precious. Villages relied on wells, deep, hand-dug, carefully maintained by the community. The bucket, lowered by rope, might creak against stone. The water, when fresh, was cold, earthy, and clear. But contamination was common. Wells could sit dangerously close to cesspits or livestock pens. A spring might run near a burial site. And so, people adapted. They boiled water, they brewed beer, they drank mead and light wines. Even young children sipped small ale. It was a safety measure, not a vice. Washing was done sparingly. Water was heavy to carry, slow to heat, and quick to cool. A weekly bath was a luxury for many. More often, hands and faces were wiped with cloth, rinsed in basins, or simply brushed off. Let us rest our thoughts beside a village well, mossy, silent, cool to the touch. A place where voices gather and the morning's first draw feels like ceremony. By the 11th and 12th centuries, towns began to swell. Markets buzzed, trade grew. Houses were built tighter, closer, piled in layers along crooked alleys, and with more people came more waste. Chamber pots were standard, ceramic, sometimes metal, occasionally wooden. When full, they were dumped into the street, sometimes with a warning, sometimes not. The phrase "gardez-le," from the French "regardez-l'eau," was shouted to alert pedestrians below. The streets were built with central troughs, kennels, to carry off the debris. But without constant rain or cleaning, these channels became clogged. Rats flourished, the air thickened. Municipal laws attempted to keep order. In London, fines were levied against those who threw waste improperly. Gong farmers, men hired to clean cesspits, became essential workers, albeit shunned for their occupation. Yet there was charm amidst the chaos. Flower sellers stood beside dung heaps. Children played in alleys. Life, dirty and vivid, pushed on. In wealthier homes, the challenge of odor was met with ingenuity. Potpourri was stored in ceramic jars, tapestries were scented, and the pomander, a perforated orb worn on the belt or around the neck, became a staple of the upper class. Filled with cloves, nutmeg, rosemary, and ambergris, the pomander was both fashion and protection. Doctors, especially during plague times, carried them constantly. Some wore the famous plague doctor mask, a beaked visor filled with aromatic herbs to filter the miasma. Incense burned in churches. Frankincense, myrrh, and sandalwood curled through the rafters, sanctifying the air. We might pause now and picture a cathedral, dark and cool, with sunlight painting dust motes in gold. The priest swings the censer. The congregation breathes in the holy smoke, hoping, praying. It keeps death at bay. If anywhere in medieval Europe maintained order, it was the monastery. Monks lived by rule, often the rule of Saint Benedict, which dictated cleanliness of body and soul. Lavatoriums, stone sinks with running water, lined the cloisters. Communal latrines were built over flowing streams. Hands were washed before prayer, meals, and after labor. Clothes were laundered by lay brothers. Soap, made from ash and fat, was used sparingly but with reverence. Monks also bathed, typically once a week, though more often if they worked with the sick or infirm. Warm water was poured into large wooden tubs. Herbs were added: mint, sage, chamomile. A monk might close his eyes and let the scent lift his spirit closer to heaven. Let us linger in that bathhouse. Candlelight flickering on stone walls, steam rising gently, a soft chant echoing from the chapel beyond. In the medieval world, religion was woven into every aspect of daily life, including the concept of hygiene. The church, ever present and powerful, held a deep influence on cleanliness. The idea of purity was not only associated with physical cleanliness, but with spiritual sanctity. Clerics and monks in particular adhered to strict codes of personal conduct, which included practices of cleanliness. Many monasteries had their own small bathing facilities, and it was often the monks who, ironically, maintained the clearest sense of hygiene. Yet, their bathing rituals were not simply for physical cleanliness. They were spiritual exercises as well. The Church taught that cleanliness was a reflection of the purity of the soul. To be clean meant more than just the body being free from dirt. It meant being pure before God. Rituals of washing hands before prayer, cleansing one's body before entering holy spaces, and bathing before important religious festivals were regular parts of life. However, there was an odd contradiction at play. Despite the importance of cleanliness in religious practices, the Church also harbored certain superstitions about bathing. In some periods, it was believed that bathing could open the pores of the skin to evil spirits. This led to periods when bathing was discouraged, even though the Church stressed personal purity in other ways. The Church, like much of medieval society, struggled with balancing cleanliness with faith. Yet, its teachings on purity and sanctity helped to shape the way people thought about hygiene. It was a journey not just to cleanse the body, but to cleanse the soul. As we move away from the spiritual, we enter the practical and often confusing world of bathing in the medieval period. While bathing was still common in some parts of Europe, it began to be viewed with increasing suspicion as the centuries wore on. The most significant shift in attitudes came during and after the Black Death. Bathhouses, once considered places of leisure and relaxation, became seen as dangerous. The idea of bad air or miasma became more widespread. People began to associate illness with the very act of bathing, as it was thought that water could open the skin and allow harmful vapors or spirits to enter the body. For centuries, this belief would persist. Bathhouses were often avoided as people feared they might contract disease. The once revered act of bathing transformed from a form of self-care into a practice that was, in some cases, regarded as risky and unhealthy. And so, bathing fell into decline. Even those who had access to it, such as the wealthy, began to question its safety. For many, it seemed safer to remain dirty, for fear of what cleanliness might bring. The nobility and royalty of medieval Europe lived in castles that were grand and impressive, but in many ways they were just as filthy as the villages they ruled. The contrast between the opulence of the nobility's daily life and the state of their hygiene is striking. While kings, queens, and noble families enjoyed large feasts, elaborate clothing, and golden chalices, the inside of a castle was not always as pristine as its grand halls might suggest. Many castles lacked running water and proper sanitation systems. Waste would often be thrown out of windows, leading to unpleasant smells and unsanitary conditions. The idea of cleanliness was not always something that aligned with the lavishness of medieval nobility. That being said, noble women and men did have access to more opportunities for personal care. Servants and attendants would assist them in maintaining their appearances, though these rituals of cleanliness were often more about presentation than true hygiene. Bathing was still an occasional luxury for the wealthy, though it was far from a regular habit. Castles did contain private bathhouses, but they were not necessarily well maintained. Rather, they were reserved for the important and occasional ritual, a far cry from the ongoing hygiene practices we expect today. Soft sound of the wind rustling through large castle windows, faint echoes of a distant conversation. In the castles of the rich and powerful, cleanliness was often an illusion. The lavish tapestries, the finely crafted furniture, and the rich food served in golden dishes all hid a reality that was far less pristine than one might expect. The distinction between the wealthy and the poor is especially evident when we look at the differences between public and private hygiene practices. For the noble, hygiene was often a private affair, something carried out in luxurious rooms or private bathhouses. For the poor, hygiene was a public affair, often conducted in communal spaces or in the open. Public bathhouses were common in many medieval towns. They were places where people of all classes could bathe, but they were also places where social distinctions were blurred. While the wealthy could afford to bathe in private, the common folk shared communal water. The bathhouses were often crowded, and the water was not changed frequently, which made them unhygienic spaces. The division between public and private hygiene was stark. For the upper classes, cleanliness was part of the carefully constructed image of wealth and status. For the lower classes, hygiene was a matter of necessity, not luxury. It was about survival, about maintaining a basic level of cleanliness in a world where water was a limited resource. In these public spaces, where hygiene was shared by many, the concept of cleanliness took on a different meaning. It was not about individual purity, but about community survival. And for all their efforts to maintain some level of cleanliness, both the rich and the poor were still faced with the realities of disease, death, and the unrelenting passage of time. As we leave the grandeur of castles and royal courts behind, we enter the world of the rural villages. The pace here is slower, more deliberate, and steeped in the rhythm of nature. Hygiene, too, is simpler. In these villages, life revolved around the seasons. Crops were planted in spring, harvested in summer, and stored for the winter months. Livestock roamed freely, and the air was thick with the scent of earth, hay, and animal manure. The concept of cleanliness in such a setting was not about purity, but about balance, a balance between the human body and the natural world. The homes in these villages were often small and simple, stone or timber structures with thatched roofs. Inside, the fire crackled and the hearth warmed the space. But warmth also brought smoke, and the floor, covered with straw, absorbed the dirt brought in by boots and feet. Water was a precious commodity. It came from wells or rivers, and fetching it was a daily chore. Villagers did not waste it on frequent baths. Instead, washing was done in a more practical manner. A quick rinse of the hands, a wipe of the face, and, on rare occasions, a full immersion in a nearby stream or pond. In rural villages, personal hygiene was closely tied to the land. People lived in a world of constant labor, and their bodies bore the marks of this toil. There were no pristine, clean hands here. Instead, dirt was a natural part of life, and cleanliness, if it existed, was always secondary to the hard work of surviving. Imagine, for a moment, the morning light filtering through the trees, the earthy smell of damp soil, and the quiet murmurs of villagers going about their day. The smell of firewood and the occasional waft of fresh bread baking. Life was not fast, but steady, slow, almost like the flow of a nearby stream. Now we move to the public bathhouse, a place where cleanliness and socializing intertwined. Though these bathhouses were more common in larger towns and cities, they were crucial to medieval life, particularly before the advent of modern plumbing. Bathhouses were not just places for personal hygiene. They were communal spaces where people gathered. Here, they could soak in the warmth of the water, chat with friends, and perhaps share news of the village or town. The act of bathing was often a social event, and the atmosphere was as much about relaxation and socializing as it was about washing away the grime of the day. Yet, despite the warm water and the comforts of the bathhouse, it was not an entirely hygienic experience. Public bathhouses were shared by many, and the water was rarely changed between visits. Disease spread easily in these crowded spaces, and bathhouses were often considered places of ill repute. The poor hygiene of these communal facilities was one of the reasons that bathing fell out of favor during the later medieval period, particularly during times of plague. But for many, the bathhouse remained a necessary part of life. Bathing, even if it was infrequent, provided a sense of physical and mental relief. The body was washed, the mind relaxed, and for a moment, all the stresses of daily life, the heavy labor, the unrelenting weather, the struggle for food, seemed to melt away. During the height of the Black Death, a new figure appeared in the streets and villages, the plague doctor. Dressed in a long, flowing robe and a beaked mask filled with aromatic herbs, the plague doctor was a strange and terrifying sight. to those who saw them. These doctors were not, in fact, very knowledgeable about the true causes of disease. They believed that illness was spread through bad air or miasma, and their masks were designed to protect them from the foul-smelling vapors they thought carried the disease. The beaks of the masks were filled with herbs like lavender, mint, and rosemary, which were believed to purify the air and keep the doctor safe from infection. The plague doctor was often called upon to visit homes where sickness had struck. They would offer their services, but their treatments were limited and based on superstition rather than science. They might bleed the patient, administer herbal remedies, or even offer prayers, but none of these methods had any real effect on the spread of the plague. Despite their lack of real medical knowledge, plague doctors became symbols of both fear and hope. They were feared because they represented the inevitable arrival of death, but they also gave people a sense of control, as if their presence somehow kept the disease at bay. Medieval medicine, for all its faults, began to make a connection between cleanliness and health. However, this understanding was rudimentary at best. Medieval doctors and healers did not know about germs or bacteria, but they understood that disease seemed to spread in dirty, unsanitary environments. They believed that uncleanliness could cause illness, and as such, they often advised patients to keep their bodies and surroundings as clean as possible. Herbal remedies and potions were commonly used to purify the body, and cleanliness became associated with healing. Medical texts from this period often emphasize the importance of washing wounds and keeping them clean, even if they did not fully understand why this helped. Yet, the idea of hygiene in medieval medicine was still heavily influenced by superstition. Physicians often relied on charms, prayers, and rituals to treat the sick, believing that illness could be a punishment from God or the result of evil spirits. The connection between cleanliness and health was slowly being made, but it would take centuries before modern hygiene practices were fully understood and implemented. By the end of the medieval period, sanitation and hygiene were beginning to shift. The Renaissance, with its renewed interest in science and the human body, began to spark new thinking about cleanliness. New ideas about public health, hygiene, and disease prevention started to take root, although it would be many years before real progress was made. In the meantime, the medieval world continued to grapple with the same issues: disease, filth, and the constant struggle to maintain some semblance of cleanliness in a world without the comforts of modern plumbing. As we draw this tale to a close, let us pause and reflect on the quiet progression of time, the slow shift from superstition and fear to understanding. The medieval era, for all its challenges, was a period of both stagnation and change, where the mysteries of cleanliness and disease were only just beginning to unfold. As we linger in the world of medieval hygiene, it is important to acknowledge how cleanliness, or the lack thereof, was deeply tied to social status and perception. In the medieval period, one's appearance and the state of their hygiene could reveal much about their social standing. The upper classes, with their access to better resources and wealth, were able to maintain a higher standard of cleanliness than the lower classes. Nobles, kings, and bishops could afford to have servants prepare their baths, and they were often the recipients of luxurious personal care. Wealthy women, for example, could indulge in fragrant herbal baths, and their homes might have running water or at least a private bathhouse. On the other hand, peasants and common folk were often forced to make do with very little. They had no servants to help them bathe, and in most cases there was no privacy or comfort associated with bathing. Their homes, often small and cramped, were dark, damp, and lacked ventilation. Their hygiene practices, while often effective in their own way, were much more rudimentary. The distinction between the clean and the dirty went beyond simple hygiene. Cleanliness was often associated with moral purity, and dirt was frequently seen as a sign of sin or moral failing. Those who were deemed unclean, often the poor or the sick, were sometimes shunned or seen as being cursed. As we think about these social distinctions, we might reflect on how much our modern world has evolved. But in the medieval era, the appearance of dirt on the skin, the hands, or the face could carry with it not just physical discomfort, but also social consequences. The clean were respected, while the dirty, those who were too poor, too sick, or too far from the social mainstream, could find themselves marginalized in ways that went beyond mere hygiene. By the late medieval period, public bathhouses began to fall out of favor. The very places that had once been centers of social life and personal care were now seen with suspicion. Bathhouses, once welcoming and warm, became associated with disease and immorality. As previously mentioned, the Black Death had left a lasting impact on the perception of bathing. People began to fear water, thinking that bathing would open the pores to allow disease to enter the body. The spread of the plague, coupled with growing fears of contagion, meant that many people started avoiding public baths altogether. Instead of gathering to soak in the warm waters with friends and neighbors, people began to rely on alternative methods for staying clean. Wealthier individuals continued to bathe in private, but the communal aspect of bathing faded away. The idea of cleanliness shifted, and people began to focus more on preserving their health through other means, such as herbal remedies, rituals, and even the use of perfumes and pomanders. As the medieval world moved toward the Renaissance, ideas about cleanliness, hygiene, and the body began to slowly evolve. The social and spiritual aspects of cleanliness gave way to more practical approaches. But for a long time, the bathhouse, with its steamy warmth, its social atmosphere, and its shared experience, was no more than a distant memory lost to time. As we move forward from the medieval period, the legacy of hygiene practices lingers, though it takes centuries for significant improvements to be made. While the medieval era left much to be desired in terms of sanitation, it also paved the way for the eventual rise of modern hygiene practices. The establishment of more permanent water systems, the rise of public health movements, and the eventual understanding of germ theory in the 19th century all stem from the primitive ideas formed during this time. Though the medieval world lacked the technology and scientific knowledge we possess today, it was a period of trial and error, a time when society grappled with questions of health and cleanliness in the face of disease, superstition, and poverty. Even as medieval society stumbled in its understanding of hygiene, there were hints of progress. The use of herbal remedies, the development of rudimentary public health measures like quarantine, and the beginnings of a more formalized approach to medicine all point toward the eventual breakthrough of modern sanitation practices. In many ways, the medieval era was the cradle of modern hygiene. It was a time of discomfort and uncertainty, but it also served as the foundation upon which we would build a healthier, cleaner future. The slow understanding of sanitation, from the miasma theory to the eventual discovery of germs, may have taken centuries to fully develop, but it began in the medieval period, in a world filled with dirt, disease, and an innate yearning for something better. As we come to the end of our journey through medieval sanitation, let us take a moment to reflect. We've walked through the streets of medieval towns, passed through crowded, smoky homes, and explored the halls of castles and the grandeur of royal courts. We've witnessed the toll of disease, the resilience of the human spirit, and the gradual but persistent march toward better hygiene and sanitation. We've also encountered the complexities of medieval life, where dirt was both a natural part of existence and a reflection of moral or social standing. Cleanliness was more than just a physical state. It was a symbol of health, virtue, and in some cases, moral purity. As you drift into a state of relaxation, consider the passage of time. The slow progression from superstition to scientific understanding, from primitive bathing rituals to modern plumbing, was not an immediate leap. It was a gradual process, one that unfolded over centuries. The medieval world, for all its struggles with hygiene, set the stage for the cleanliness and health we now take for granted. So, as you lie in the quiet of your space, perhaps imagining the murmur of medieval life around you, take comfort in the fact that change, even in its slowest forms, is inevitable. What might seem like a long and difficult journey is, in hindsight, simply a part of the great flow of time. As we drift further into the late medieval period, we begin to see the first signs of an emerging awareness around urban sanitation. Medieval cities were bustling centers of trade, culture, and power. However, they were also plagued by unsanitary conditions that were detrimental to public health. The streets of these cities were often filled with waste, animal dung, refuse from homes, and human excrement, all tossed into the streets without much thought for the consequences. Water supplies, too, were often contaminated. Wells were dug near cesspits, and drinking water became a dangerous commodity. In the midst of these challenges, early attempts to create cleaner, more organized cities slowly began to take shape. City authorities, recognizing the need for a cleaner environment, began to implement rudimentary waste management systems. Some cities developed designated areas for waste disposal, and in others, streets were cleared regularly. However, these changes were slow to take hold and were often met with resistance. Yet, these early, slow efforts in urban sanitation were important. They laid the groundwork for the eventual development of modern urban infrastructure, a system of cleanliness and health that we take for granted today. Physicians in the medieval period were not what we think of today. They were often steeped in superstition, relying on ancient texts and traditional practices to treat illness. However, they also recognized, even if only dimly, that hygiene played a role in health. Medieval medicine was a fascinating blend of folklore, trial and error, and some early advancements. Doctors were concerned not only with treating sickness, but with preventing it, although their ideas of prevention were often based on the understanding of humours, astrology, and various potions. One area where physicians could make a difference was in the cleanliness of wounds. They understood, albeit imperfectly, that dirty wounds were more likely to become infected, so they would clean them as best they could, often with herbal remedies or vinegar. Physicians also advised patients on how to maintain some level of hygiene. While they didn't have a full understanding of germ theory, they believed that certain practices, such as washing hands before eating, could prevent illness. In larger cities, hospitals often had basic sanitation procedures in place, such as washing linens and cleaning the rooms where patients rested. In this way, the role of the medieval physician was integral, though limited. They were among the first to make the connection between cleanliness and health, even if their understanding of why was still unclear. The Crusades, which spanned several centuries, were a pivotal moment in European history. They brought many changes, both politically and culturally, but one of the most significant influences was the exposure to new ideas, particularly those from the Islamic world. During the Crusades, European knights and soldiers traveled to the Middle East, where they encountered a more advanced understanding of medicine, hygiene, and sanitation. Islamic scholars had long practiced more thorough methods of cleanliness, including the use of soap and regular bathing. Bathhouses in the Islamic world were sophisticated, and public health systems were far ahead of their time. When the Crusaders returned to Europe, they brought back some of these practices, although they were not immediately adopted. The idea of using soap, for example, slowly made its way into European society. Still, it would take centuries for these practices to become widespread. The Crusades were not only about war, but about the exchange of knowledge. The medieval period, though deeply entrenched in superstition and limited science, began to glimpse a broader world where cleanliness, health, and medicine were more advanced. This knowledge would, in time, influence the development of European medical practices and lead to the gradual improvements in sanitation that would come centuries later. Let us now turn to hygiene in the home, a quiet but important aspect of medieval life. While castles and royal courts may have had their own standards of cleanliness, the homes of peasants and common folk were often far more modest. Homes in the medieval period were usually small, and most people shared a single room, often with several generations of family members. Cleanliness was often a matter of practicality rather than luxury. People did not have many possessions, and their living spaces were kept as tidy as necessary to ensure safety and comfort. Personal hygiene at home was focused on the basics: washing the hands, face, and feet, and tending to hair and nails when possible. There was little space for privacy, so most bathing was done in the family's main living area. For the wealthy, bathing was a private affair, but for the poor, it was a communal activity, shared with family members. Water was the key to cleanliness, but it was also a precious resource. People would fetch water from wells, rivers, or communal fountains. Bathing itself was not as common as we might expect, but maintaining basic personal cleanliness was important for daily survival and health. In many ways, these humble homes were the heart of medieval hygiene. Despite their small size and lack of resources, families in these homes still made efforts to stay as clean as possible, knowing that their health depended on it. As the medieval period drew to a close, the Renaissance began to emerge on the horizon. It was a time of intellectual flourishing, a rebirth of learning and curiosity that would forever alter the trajectory of human history. With the Renaissance came new ideas about the human body, health, and cleanliness. During the Renaissance, there was a renewed interest in science, art, and the human form. The human body was celebrated in ways it had not been before, and hygiene slowly became more connected to the advancement of medicine and health. New ideas about personal care and cleanliness took root, though they were still far from modern standards. Public health measures began to be explored, and the importance of clean water, sanitation, and hygiene began to be more understood. The Renaissance did not immediately bring cleanliness to every corner of society, but the seeds for a cleaner world were planted. Over the next few centuries, these ideas would grow and develop, slowly leading to the vast improvements in hygiene and sanitation that would change the world. In the dim, flickering light of the bathhouses of medieval Europe, whispers of strange stories floated through the steam and hot water. Bathhouses, which were often seen as places of leisure, were also imbued with a sense of mystery and the supernatural. For many, the bath was not just a place to cleanse the body, but a place where one could connect to the world beyond. In some regions, it was believed that water held great power. It was not only able to cleanse, but could also heal. There were tales of mysterious water spirits, gentle but mischievous, who dwelled beneath the surface of the bathwater. These spirits were said to grant blessings to those who entered the water with pure intentions, but they would punish those who misused the bathhouses or were disrespectful to the sanctity of water. One such story comes from a small village in France, where it was said that a spirit named Lo Marie watched over the village's bathhouse. She was believed to be a guardian of cleanliness, a spirit who protected the bathers from illness, ensuring the water was clean and pure. However, those who bathed with malice or ill will would find themselves visited by Lo Marie, who would drag them under the water and leave them with a sense of dread, their skin covered with sores as a reminder to respect the cleansing process. These stories were whispered among the people, passed down through generations. They helped instill a sense of reverence for cleanliness, even if the villagers did not fully understand why the act of bathing was so important. As we delve deeper into the period of the Black Death, we encounter the strange and eerie legend of the plague doctor. The physician who wore a long, beaked mask is one of the most iconic images of the medieval world. But behind this haunting image lies a rich folklore tied to the desperate attempts to understand and control disease. According to one legend, a lone plague doctor roamed the streets of a village in Italy, where the pestilence had taken root with relentless speed. This doctor, dressed in his ominous garb, was said to possess knowledge passed down from ancient healers. But his appearance was not just to protect him from the disease, it was also to shield him from the unseen forces that the villagers believed caused the plague. It was said that the beak of the mask was not just a protection against miasma, but was believed to ward off evil spirits that could invade the body and soul. Some villagers whispered that the plague doctor was not a man at all, but an otherworldly being sent to either cure or punish. There were stories of those who were visited by the plague doctor and miraculously recovered, their bodies cleansed of the pestilence, while others were not so fortunate. The legend of the plague doctor, with his dark robes and piercing gaze, became a part of medieval folklore. His presence was a reminder of both the fear of disease and the desperate need for cleanliness and hygiene in a world that often seemed beyond control. In the shadowy corners of medieval Europe, where superstition and fear of the unknown were at their peak, there were also stories of witches and the mysterious ways they cleansed themselves. Witches were believed to possess great power, and their knowledge of herbs, potions, and purification rituals was often seen as both dangerous and sacred. One story from the English countryside tells of a young woman named Elspeth, who was accused of witchcraft. It was said that Elspeth had a secret bath deep in the forest, hidden from the eyes of the town. The waters of this bath, according to the legend, were no ordinary waters. They were said to have been enchanted by the moon, and those who bathed in them would be cleansed of curses and evil spirits. But there was a price to pay. To enter the waters, one had to be pure of heart and free from sin. Any impurity would cause the water to turn black, and those who bathed would be marked with a curse. It was said that Elspeth, in her desperation to rid herself of the accusations against her, bathed in the moonlit water but was caught by the villagers. They found her cleansed but strangely hollow, her skin pale and her eyes distant. Some believed that Elspeth had been saved from the witch's curse, while others whispered that she had been cursed by the very water that had promised to purify her. Whether fact or fiction, these stories were used to caution people about the dangers of uncleanliness, not just in the body, but in the soul. The idea of a ritual bath to cleanse oneself of sin or curse carried with it a deep symbolic meaning, one that merged the physical and spiritual. One of the most prevalent fears in medieval times was the belief in miasma, the notion that foul smells or bad air were the cause of disease. It was thought that miasma was an invisible, malevolent force lingering in the streets, coming from stagnant water or rotting waste. Villages and cities with poor sanitation were believed to be cursed with this foul, invisible entity. There's a story from a small English village where a terrible disease was sweeping through the population. The villagers were terrified, unsure of what was causing the illness. Some believed it was a curse from the gods. Others thought it was a punishment for sins. But one elderly woman, a healer of sorts, had a different idea. She believed that the disease was not a curse, but a manifestation of miasma. With no scientific understanding of germs, she devised a simple yet effective remedy. She instructed the villagers to burn fragrant herbs and flowers around their homes, hoping the smoke would drive away the miasma. To her surprise, the illness began to lessen. Whether it was the herbs or the villagers' belief in the ritual, the story of the miasma faded into myth, but it carried with it a message of the importance of cleanliness in preventing disease. This story became a part of the folklore of the village, passed down through generations. It was a tale of survival in the face of the unknown, and a reminder of the ever-present struggle to stay clean and free from the dangers lurking just beyond the senses. Across the medieval world, pilgrims took to the road, driven by faith, fear, and the hope of divine healing. These sacred journeys were not only about reaching a holy destination, but about shedding one's earthly burdens, including illness, sin, and in many cases, filth. Pilgrims often traveled for weeks or months, sleeping in barns or under the stars, walking barefoot over stones and through muddy paths. Along the way, they would stop at holy wells and healing springs, believed to be touched by the divine. These were not ordinary places. They were places where heaven and earth were thought to meet, where the water could heal wounds and cleanse the soul. One such tale speaks of St. Winifred's well in Wales. According to legend, Winifred was a noble maiden who resisted a suitor's advances and was beheaded for her chastity. Where her head struck the earth, a spring burst forth. Pilgrims bathed in its waters, believing it could heal everything from skin diseases to spiritual despair. The act of washing in these sacred waters was more than a ritual. It was an act of rebirth. Pilgrims returned home cleaner, not just in body, but in spirit, carrying stories of healing, of light, and of water that whispered with the memory of saints. In a time when cleanliness was often scarce and bathing was infrequent, the humble soap maker held a quiet but vital role. Nestled at the edge of towns or in tucked-away corners of villages, these artisans stirred great bubbling cauldrons filled with oils, ashes, and herbs. Soap in the medieval era was not the perfumed bar we know today. It was harsh, gritty, and sometimes pungent. But it worked. Lye made from wood ash was mixed with animal fats and scented with whatever herbs were available: lavender, rosemary, or even thyme. A tale often told in the soap makers' guilds was of Breda, a young girl who, abandoned as an infant, was raised by an old herbalist. Breda learned to stir soap from dawn to dusk, using rainwater and petals she picked in the forest at first light. It was said that those who used Breda's soap never fell ill, and that her fingers could tell sickness by touch alone. Some believed her soaps were enchanted, blessed by forest spirits, or infused with healing moonlight. Soap making was more than a trade. It was a kind of alchemy. Each bar was shaped by hand, wrapped in cloth, and passed from palm to palm with hope. And in the quiet villages where water was scarce and disease always near, a bar of soap was something close to sacred. In the hours when most slept soundly in their beds, another group walked the shadowed streets, the night soil men. Their work was grim, their presence often unwelcome, but they were essential to the fragile health of the medieval city. These men, often shrouded in cloaks and scarves to mask the odor, would visit cesspits and privies by lantern light. With iron buckets and spades, they removed human waste, carrying it beyond the city walls where it could no longer threaten the water supply or spread disease. Their labor was silent, thankless, and dangerous, but without it, towns would have drowned in their own filth. In London, a chilling tale was told of the whisperer of the sewers, a man named Jory, who worked the underground passages beneath the city. It was said he could speak to the rats and knew every hidden tunnel. One winter, when plague threatened the city again, Jory vanished. But the sickness, strangely, never spread. People whispered that he had given his life to seal a forgotten tunnel that led the foul miasma away. Though scorned in life, these workers were quiet heroes, unsung and unseen. Without them, the medieval city could not breathe. In the hush of stone cloisters and candle-lit abbeys, monks and nuns pursued not just spiritual purity, but physical cleanliness. Unlike the world outside, monastic orders had routines that included regular washing, not out of vanity, but of devotion. Monks in orders like the Benedictines washed their hands before meals, clean their feet after long walks, and sometimes even bathed weekly, a luxury in the medieval world. They cultivated herb gardens not only for medicine, but for making oils and soaps, which they used sparingly and reverently. One peaceful story from an Irish monastery tells of Brother Cian, who planted lavender and mint in the monastery garden. Each morning, before prayers, he would walk barefoot to the spring and fill a clay bowl with water scented by these herbs. He would wash his hands and face, whispering blessings for the sick and the poor. It is said that those who used the water from Brother Cian's basin recovered more quickly, their fevers breaking like mist at sunrise. In these sanctuaries, cleanliness was quiet and contemplative, a means to draw closer to the divine. The soul, they believed, could not be clean if the body was not also made clean. In the folk traditions of the countryside, where formal medicine was scarce, people turned to old beliefs and protective charms. Cleanliness, to them, was more than washing. It was spiritual defense. It was common to hang bundles of herbs in doorways, yarrow to guard against fever, chamomile to keep the house sweet-smelling, and wormwood to chase away sickness. Mothers would tuck sprigs of rosemary under their children's pillows, whispering charms to ward off the filth that creeps in the night. One enduring legend is that of the charwoman's broom, a tale told in Brittany. A poor cleaning woman named Helen was said to have swept disease from homes with a broom woven from oak twigs and tied with silver ribbon. Those she visited never fell ill. It was whispered that her broom had been blessed by a forest spirit who lived in a well behind the old chapel ruins. After Helen's death, the broom was buried with her, and no sickness touched the village for a generation. These tales remind us how, in a world of mystery and uncertainty, people clung to belief, and in that belief they found comfort, a kind of cleanliness for the spirit, if not always the skin. In every corner of medieval Europe, near rivers, brooks, and public fountains, you would find the washerwomen, bent over the water, sleeves rolled, hands red from the cold, singing old songs that echoed across the stones. They were called lavandières in France, lavandais in Italy, and wäscherinnen in Germany. Their task was unglamorous, yet vital. They washed linen, cloth, and clothing, not just for their own homes, but often for wealthier townsfolk who paid in bread or coin. In a world where filth could lead to fever, these women were silent sentinels against sickness. But around their labor grew legends. In Brittany, there are ancient tales of the les lavandières de la nuit, the washerwomen of the night. These were ghostly figures who appeared by moonlight, endlessly scrubbing the blood-stained clothes of those who would soon die. It was said that if you encountered them at a stream and refused to help wring out the cloth, they would drag you into the dark waters. But if you lent a hand and followed their directions exactly, they would grant you protection for the rest of your days. These tales, equal parts warning and wonder, taught respect for water, for cleanliness, and for those whose hands worked ceaselessly to keep disease at bay. Long before medicine was understood, people turned to nature, and particularly to water, for healing. Across the countryside were scattered sacred springs and holy wells, many of which had been venerated since pagan times, later Christianized and watched over by saints. It was believed that the water from these springs could cure blindness, fevers, rashes, and even heartbreak. Pilgrims would walk for days to dip cloths into the waters, or to drink from the stone basins, whispering prayers to the spirits believed to dwell within. One particularly soothing tale comes from the north of England, the story of St. Cuthbert's Spring. Nestled in a mossy glen, the spring was said to have been struck from the earth by Cuthbert's staff. Mothers brought their children there to wash away fevers, and on quiet days, villagers claimed they could hear angelic singing rising from the pool, as if heaven itself bathed there. These waters offered not only physical cleansing, but peace of mind, calm for the weary traveller, a balm for the frightened soul. In an age before pharmacies, the village herbalist was both healer and protector, a keeper of knowledge passed through generations, mostly by women. These figures knew which herbs soothed the stomach, which roots drew out infection, and which flowers, dried and crushed, made fragrant poultices for washing wounds or scenting rooms. A calming tale from the Black Forest tells of Marta Grun, an elderly woman with silver hair who lived alone in a cottage overgrown with ivy. It was said she spoke to the plants, asking their permission before cutting a single stem. Her washing mixtures were legendary, made with steeped calendula, chamomile, and elderflower, and no child who bathed in them ever suffered from rashes or fever. Marta's remedies were more than medicine, they were rituals. Her washing basins were shaped of smooth stone, her ladles carved with little suns and moons. She would recite quiet prayers as she worked, her voice low and musical, like the wind through leaves. Such herbalists offered an ancient kind of hygiene, care that was tender, intuitive, and rooted in the natural rhythms of the earth. Let us, just for a moment, step into a quiet scene, a castle, not bustling with knights or war, but softly hushed in the hours before twilight. Today is bath day. A wooden tub is drawn into the solar, the warmest room in the keep. The servants fill it slowly, bucket by bucket, from a cauldron heated over the great hearth. The bath is lined with linen and scented with rose petals and marjoram. The noblewoman of the house, wrapped in a robe of wool and fur, steps lightly toward the water, the flickering candlelight dancing in her eyes. As she sinks into the tub, sighing deeply, the air fills with the scents of herbs and wood smoke. This bath is not just for cleanliness. It is a sanctuary. A maid brushes her hair with slow strokes, while another hums a lullaby her mother once sang in the fields. Outside the stone walls, life may be chaotic, but in this moment, warm, still, perfumed, time itself seems to pause. Cleanliness becomes an act of care, of softness, of peace. Even in an era where bathing was less frequent than today, lovers still took great pains to present themselves as clean and sweet-smelling. A suitor might not bathe daily, but he would rinse his hands and face, wash his mouth with mint leaves, and dab rosewater behind his ears. Young women were taught to keep their hair brushed and clean, to use rosemary vinegar to freshen their breath, and to wear little sachets of dried lavender in their bodices. In Italy, men might carry scented handkerchiefs tucked into their sleeves, offered to ladies with a flourish and a bow. A gentle story from Provence tells of Etienne, a baker's apprentice who fell in love with the miller's daughter. Too poor to afford fine perfumes, he mixed crushed violets with water and kept the bottle by the window, letting the sun infuse it with warmth. Every Sunday he would dab it behind his ears before walking past her father's mill. The scent, it is said, made her smile, and in time it made her fall in love. Hygiene, in such small ways, became part of affection, a language of care, of preparation, of love, whispered through scent and softness. In quiet hamlets where rivers did not run and wells were far between, villagers turned to the sky for water, capturing rainfall in great stone cisterns, clay pots, and carved basins. These were no ordinary containers. Some were etched with protective charms, crosses, and symbols to ward off rot and misfortune. Others were blessed by village priests or left under full moons to charge the water with purity. Old women said that rainwater caught during a thunderstorm was too wild to wash with, but rain gathered on the eve of a holy day was soft enough to cleanse a baby's skin or rinse a young girl's hair before her wedding. In Transylvanian folklore, there is a story of Ilona the Washer, who only bathed using moon-blessed rain. It was said that her skin shone faintly silver and that any cloth she washed stayed clean for 3 full seasons. When she passed, her village placed her cistern at the foot of the hill, and still, to this day, say the water never grows green. Water, especially from the heavens, was more than a necessity. It was a gift, and to wash with it was to share in something sacred and sky-born. Before holy days or great festivals, Easter, St. John's Eve, midsummer weddings, entire villages would partake in communal cleaning rituals. Hearths were scrubbed, garments were beaten and rinsed in the stream, and families gathered to wash together. On Midsummer's Eve, it was customary in many regions to bathe in the river at dusk. This wasn't merely to clean the body, it was a ritual meant to wash away bad luck, misfortune, and the weight of old sorrows. In Estonia, an old tale speaks of Lilo and the solstice spring. Each year, she and her sisters would walk in silence to the spring, dressed in white. They would bathe by starlight, each one whispering a secret into the water. The water, cool and listening, carried their secrets away. The next morning, they woke with soft hair, clear eyes, and no memory of what they had spoken. Such cleansing was never just physical. It was renewal, transformation, a shedding of the old self. And wrapped in firelight, songs, and stillness, it helped communities emerge from the darkness of winter into the light of hope. When the Great Plague swept across Europe, cleanliness took on an urgent, frantic tone. People believed disease spread through miasma, bad air, so they clung to scents as a kind of invisible armor. Doctors wore strange beaked masks filled with herbs like lavender, clove, and juniper. Nobles burned incense and kept bowls of vinegar soaked in rosemary by their doors. Streets were swept more thoroughly, not out of civic pride, but terror. A soft, tragic tale survives from Florence, of a woman named Bianca who sold little bundles of lavender wrapped in lace. She would leave them on windowsills and at the foot of doorways. When asked why she gave them freely, she said, "They keep my grief from taking root." It was said that no house she blessed fell to the plague. Though fear walked hand in hand with death, it also led people to seek out cleanliness as never before, not as vanity, but as hope, as armor, as a quiet cry for mercy. Among the wealthy, bathing was rare, but scent was everything. To mask the natural odors of unwashed bodies, noble women wore gloves soaked in aromatic oils and perfumed powders. These gloves were often made from softest kidskin and sewn with tiny sachets stitched into the cuffs. A noblewoman might raise her hand not just in gesture, but to subtly inhale the lavender or rose oil woven into her gloves. These were tokens of status. scented symbols of refinement and restraint. In Spain, there is a romantic legend of Isabel of Valencia, whose gloves were said to be perfumed by a Moorish alchemist who loved her from afar. His scent blend was so delicate that when Isabel entered a room, people turned to find the source of the fragrance. She never knew his name, but when she passed, the gloves were buried with her, and no one could recreate the perfume again. Through scent, the noble classes created a kind of invisible hygiene, not cleansing the skin, but cloaking it in beauty, in longing, in memory. While the West grappled with limited water and old superstition, the East kept its traditions of bathing alive, particularly in Byzantium and the Islamic world. Here, the bathhouse, or hammam, was a place of beauty, ritual, and healing. Domed chambers filled with steam, marble slabs warmed by hidden fires, and attendants who massaged, scrubbed, and perfumed the body. The hammam was not just a bath, it was a sanctuary. One beloved story from the city of Constantinople tells of the bathing prince, a child who was born ill and never laughed. But when brought to the great imperial baths and bathed in oils warmed with orange blossom and mint, he let out a sound, a clear, silver laugh. The story says he laughed every day after, as long as he returned to the water. The Eastern traditions preserved a continuity of cleanliness lost in much of medieval Europe, and in their wake they left stories like incense smoke, fragrant, drifting, and softly unforgettable. The lanterns are glowing low, the air is cool and gentle, and the stories await, like forgotten whispers hidden in the pages of time. As we continue, we now drift into the heart of the rising medieval city, where cobbled streets, bell towers, and crowded alleys bring us to two quiet, compelling ideas: the laws that kept illness at bay and the mystical pursuit of cleansing the soul from within. As towns grew from sleepy hamlets into bustling centers of trade and faith, the need for order grew with them. And though the medieval city may seem to us now as chaotic and unclean, there were those who, in candlelit chambers and echoing halls, began to shape the laws of public hygiene. In the 12th and 13th centuries, cities like London, Paris, and Lubeck issued ordinances, fragile scrolls of parchment that governed waste, water, and cleanliness. But it wasn't just bureaucracy. These laws were acts of protection, of care, quiet attempts to shield the many from the unseen hands of disease. In Florence, the Guild of Physicians and Apothecaries worked closely with city officials to clear refuse from streets, to build covered sewers, to create fines for those who dumped night soil into the Arno. In Lubeck, wells were covered and watched. In Milan, laundresses were assigned specific days to use the rivers, so the waters would not become overwhelmed. There's a soft tale from Bruges, whispered among night watchmen, of the Candleman, a quiet figure who walked the alleys just before dawn, carrying a single beeswax taper. If he saw filth in the streets, he'd mark the doors nearby with chalk, not to shame, but to warn, a soft sign that cleaning was needed before illness settled in. It is said that no home marked by the Candleman ever fell to plague. Though rudimentary, these early health laws mark the beginning of a new kind of care, one not only for the body, but for the collective, for the unseen threads that tied neighbor to neighbor through the shared breath of the city. Long before the flush of warm water or the lather of soap, there was another form of cleansing, one not of the skin, but of the spirit. To fast, in medieval thought, was to quiet the body so that the soul might speak. Fasting was not only for penance, but for purification, a holy hygiene that came from emptiness, from stillness, from choosing simplicity in a world of temptation. Monks and nuns followed seasonal fasts with devotion. In the Benedictine monasteries, Lent was a time of sparse fare, silent contemplation, and the belief that a cleansed gut led to a cleansed heart. Bread and water, with perhaps a few herbs or a spoon of lentils, was thought to flush the sins of pride and gluttony from the body. There is a sweet story from an abbey in the rolling hills of Normandy of Sister Colette, who fasted every third day. On these nights, she would walk barefoot through the garden, whispering prayers to the rosemary and sage, touching each plant with reverence. "My soul," she once wrote in a faded letter, "feels washed by the quiet ache of hunger." In Eastern Christian lore, desert mystics fasted so deeply that they were said to become weightless, floating inches above the earth. A tale from the Sinai Mountains tells of a hermit named Eleazar, who lived on olives and water for 7 years. When he finally emerged from solitude, people swore the wind moved more gently around him, and the birds came to rest on his shoulders. Fasting was not deprivation, it was purification, a turning inward, a silent washing of the soul that required no basin, no soap, only stillness. And in that stillness, believers found lightness, found peace, found something like the soft hush of falling snow. Let us continue, then, into gentler waters still, where the cycles of life and death, of birth and passing, were honored with ancient rites, soft hands, and whispered prayers, where the washing of a newborn was as sacred as the final cleansing of the dead. We drift now into the twilight places of the medieval world, filled with lavender steam, candlelight, and the sacred hush that comes with tending life's most tender thresholds. In cottages beneath moss-covered roofs and in stone keeps echoing with prayers. The moment a child entered the world was accompanied not only by joy and fear, but by water. Midwives were the guardians of these moments. Often older women with knowledge passed from hand to hand. They knew the herbs to boil, the prayers to murmur, and the timing of that first holy wash. The newborn skin, still covered in vernix, the waxy bloom of life, would be gently cleansed with linen cloths soaked in warm water, steeped with chamomile or thyme. It was believed that herbs helped ward off illness and spirits alike. One tale from the region of Brittany tells of Madame Iselle, a midwife whose hands were said to glow faintly during childbirth. She would bathe the newborns in water gathered from a sacred spring, said to run only when the moon was full. Mothers claimed their children, when washed this way, slept through the night from the very first day. These washings were not only physical acts, they were rituals of welcome, protection, and blessing. The child was being introduced to the world, to the rhythms of breath and warmth and gentle care. And as life entered with water, so too did it leave. When a soul passed from this world, families prepared the body with reverence and quiet. Before burial, the deceased was bathed, often by women of the village, or, in wealthier circles, by attendants who knew the sacred rites. The body was washed slowly with warm water infused with rosemary, myrtle, or frankincense. Each limb was lifted with care, each hand dried with linen, as prayers were murmured to guide the soul on its journey. In medieval Ireland, it was said that washing the dead with water from a silver bowl could help them find their way more swiftly to peace. In Prague, there is an old story of old Luca, the washer of the dead, who never charged a coin, only asked for a candle to be lit in her name. "Clean them gently," she'd whisper, "for they have walked far." The act of washing the dead was an act of love, a final touch, a last tenderness before the soil closed. It was said that a well-washed soul would return in dreams, smiling, whole, and grateful. Not all cleansing was done with cloth and soap. Some believed that healing came from places, from springs that bubbled mysteriously in forests or pools that shimmered under moonlight. In the shadowed woodlands of Poland, old women told tales of the Whispering Pool, a hidden spring where maidens bathed to cure heartache. They would step in silently, eyes closed, and listen. If the water murmured their name, they were healed. If not, they would return the next night until the whisper came. In Iceland, a legend speaks of the bath of the elves, a steaming rock pool where, if one bathed while humming a lullaby, old scars would fade and broken bones would mend. The tale says that the elves only allowed the pure of heart to find the pool, and that those who did returned changed, softened, serene. And in a small village in France, nestled near the Loire, there's a mossy basin known as Marie's Mirror, where women seeking children would bathe before dawn. They believed that the water remembered the touch of every mother who had come before. These enchanted waters were more than myth. They were places where the body and spirit were made whole again, where the soul could rest, where sleep and peace and healing all live just beneath the surface. As we drift ever closer to the final chapters of this journey, let us rest in the quiet truth that our ancestors knew well, that cleanliness in all its forms was not about perfection. It was about rhythm, about ritual, about care. From the stone basins of silent abbeys to the bustling steams of Turkish hammams, from the secret springs of forest myths to the worn hands of midwives and the scent of rosemary on a deathbed. Washing was always a form of love, a way of saying, "You are here, you are sacred, you are held." And so, dear listener, may your rest tonight be like the calmest of baths, warm, still, and cleansing. May your dreams carry you gently, like driftwood on a quiet stream. The soft shadows of a world long past, where the scent of herbs floats on the wind, where water glimmers in candlelight, and where every ritual is woven with meaning. With each chapter, you may feel your breath grow slower, your eyes just a little heavier, as the stories wrap around you like warm linen sheets. Imagine, if you will, the slow start of a medieval morning. The sun peeks through latticed windows, and in the hearth, embers glow like sleepy eyes. A comb carved from bone rests on a wooden table beside a small vial of scented oil, perhaps rose, perhaps lavender. For many, daily grooming was not elaborate, but it was cherished. Hair was untangled slowly, methodically, sometimes by another's hand. To comb one's hair was to think, to breathe, to begin again. A gentle ritual at the edge of waking life. In monasteries, tonsured monks combed what little hair they had in silence. In castles, noblewomen brushed each other's locks beside warm braziers, humming lullabies handed down from their mothers. In cottages, even the simplest peasant might have a twig of mint tucked behind the ear. A tradition from 14th century Provence tells of a bride who would comb her hair 100 times the night before her wedding. each stroke a prayer for peace, love, and restful nights. Let yourself be still now, as if someone were gently brushing your own hair over and over, smooth, unhurried, each motion more peaceful than the last. To the medieval heart, water was not merely for washing. It was a symbol of rebirth, of spirit, of divine mercy. In nearly every corner of the world, holy water trickled through the beliefs of the people like a quiet stream through the forest. In Christianity, baptism was the most sacred of cleansings. To be immersed or sprinkled with blessed water was to be made new, cleansed not of dirt, but of sin, of heaviness, of doubt. In Gothic cathedrals, stone basins were carved with angels and vines, holding the water that promised new beginnings. In Islam, the act of wudu, ritual washing before prayer, was deeply spiritual. Hands, mouth, face, feet, each rinsed with intention, with calmness. The Prophet Muhammad once said, "Cleanliness is half of faith." What a lovely idea to drift off with. And in Jewish tradition, the mikveh, the ritual bath, offered purity before weddings, holidays, and after life transitions. Sacred, secluded, filled with light and silence. There's a tale from Spain of La Fuente Clara, a spring said to flow only when the heart of the pilgrim was truly repentant. Travelers would kneel beside its stone mouth, and only if their intentions were pure would the first drop fall. Water dripping gently, the soft echo of a chant in a cathedral nave, the flutter of candlelight. Close your eyes now, if they are not already closed. Imagine warm water cupped in your palms, a gentle splash on your cheeks, the feeling of beginning anew. The medieval barber was more than a cutter of hair. He was a surgeon, a tooth puller, a bloodletter, a washer of wounds, and, in his way, a quiet keeper of wellness. Step now into a tiny shop tucked into the corner of a town square. It smells of rosemary and old leather. A chair creaks beneath a client, and the barber sharpens his blade with a rhythm like a lullaby. Shink, shink. He trims beards, tends to sores, even opens veins to let the bad humors escape. Beside him, a basin of warm water steams faintly. He dips a cloth, wrings it out slowly, presses it to the face of an old man who sighs with relief. Barber surgeons were often the first to arrive in times of plague, the last to flee. With their aprons stained and fingers worn, they brought not only tools, but a kind of strange comfort, like the hush of a lullaby sung beside danger. A folk rhyme from Sussex goes, "The barber's bowl, the blade's slow kiss, shall heal the pain you didn't miss. Sit still, breathe deep, don't fear the sting. The blade shall make the spirit sing." Now, imagine a warm towel placed upon your brow, the hands of someone practiced and kind, the soothing hush of small pains being lifted away one by one. Now let us dream a little deeper into the velvet folds of myth. In the green, misty hills of ancient Wales, there once lived a woman known only as the Lady of the Spring. She dwelled in a stone cottage near a hidden glen where water, cold and sweet, bubbled from beneath the roots of an ancient ash tree. Villagers came to her when grief sat heavy upon their hearts, or when illness lingered like a shadow that would not lift. She would bathe their feet in the spring, stroke their hands with lavender oil, and whisper old songs that only the trees seemed to know. The water, they said, remembered sorrow, and took it away. One night, a young knight came, wounded not in body, but in spirit. He had seen too much, lost too many, and could no longer sleep. The lady sat him by the spring and sang for him, a melody so old even the stars paused to listen. When he awoke, hours later, tears rested on his cheeks, not from pain, but from something softer, something healing. He returned to battle the next day, but he never again feared the night. Let the spring water touch your thoughts now. Let the burdens flow outward, like ink diluted in a clear pool. Let peace wrap around you like a woolen shawl at dusk. Float down this soft and steady stream, deeper into the forgotten rituals, the soothing stories, and the mystical waters of a world long gone but never entirely lost. The moonlight glimmers on the surface, the wind hushes in the trees, and the night invites you to let go. Settle in. Your dreams are close now. In an age where medicine was scarce and understanding of the body was limited, the faithful often turned to the divine. Across medieval Europe, stories spread of springs and wells blessed by saints, waters that healed the sick, calmed the mad, and washed away the heavy burdens of grief. One such place was the Well of St. Winifred in North Wales. Legend tells of young Winifred, a pious girl pursued by a cruel suitor. When she refused him, he struck off her head, and where it fell, a spring burst forth from the earth. But the saint was miraculously restored by her uncle, Saint Bruno, and the spring that remained was said to hold powers of healing. Even today, the water of St. Winifred's well is cool, clear, and tinged with legend. Pilgrims still come to bathe in it, whispering prayers as they step gently into the sacred pool. Further east, in Italy, pilgrims once travelled miles to the fountain of St. Catherine, where a single drop was said to cure fevers and brighten weary spirits. Locals swore that the water sang softly, like a choir of invisible monks, if you listened closely at dusk. As you listen, imagine kneeling by the edge of one such spring, your hand trailing in cool, blessed waters. Each drop carries peace, each ripple rest. You are being cleansed not just in body, but in heart, in thought, in the soft, untouchable places within. In the frozen reaches of medieval Scandinavia, deep beneath the snow-covered hills, there lived a village known only in stories, Lochella, or the Light Shelter. There, hidden among the pines, was a wooden bathhouse kept warm all year round by hot springs that rose from the heart of the earth. Every winter solstice, as the long night stretched across the sky, the villagers would gather in silence. They removed their heavy woolen clothes and stepped one by one into the steaming pool, lit only by lanterns and the shimmer of stars through the roof's smoke hole. There was no speaking, only the sound of water, the sigh of breath, the snow settling outside. Elders, children, hunters, and mothers, all were equal in the warmth of the bath. All their sins, their fears, their hardships of the past year melted away. The bath was watched over by Elder, the keeper, a woman said to be part troll, part spirit, and part snow. She carried no voice, only a bowl of herbs that she tossed into the spring, juniper, spruce tips, dried mountain thyme. The scent wrapped around the bathers like a dream. Tonight, you are one of them. The steam welcomes you. The heat touches your skin like a lullaby. And in this quiet, your thoughts fall away, like leaves into water. Spring was not only a time of planting and sunlight, it was a time of renewal, both outside and within. And so, medieval homes were cleaned with the same care given to sacred rites. Every rush that had lined the floors through the winter was swept away. Herbs were burned to drive out illness and sadness. Bed linens were beaten and hung in the wind. It was believed that dust carried bad dreams, that cobwebs trapped worry, that a clean hearth was an open door for good spirits. In villages across the Alps, there was a tradition known as the sleeping spirit. Before the spring cleaning, a small doll made of straw, rosemary, and blue thread was placed in the house's darkest corner. It was said that the doll absorbed the family's bad luck during the winter. Once spring came, the doll was gently burned in the fire, and all misfortune drifted away with the smoke. In the Low Countries, housewives sprinkled lavender water on the doorsteps to keep sorrow from returning. They sang as they scrubbed, soft and slow, a song not meant to be heard, but felt. Let your thoughts be swept now, like rushes tossed into a new spring breeze. Let the burdens be burned away in the hearth of your mind. You are being made new, quietly, without effort, just by listening, just by being. And now, dear traveller, we come to the softest place of all, a place beyond time, beyond stone walls and soot-streaked hearths. The baths of heaven, some say, lie at the edge of dreams. They are not built of marble or filled by springs, but formed from memory and quiet, warmed by stars, scented with forgotten songs. Here, everyone is welcome. Here, the old wounds do not ache, and the breath is always slow. You walk barefoot across cool grass. A gentle breeze lifts your hair. You come to a still pool of silver water, not cold, not hot, but perfect. You step in, and with each ripple, something lets go. Worry, noise, the tightness behind your eyes. You sink slowly, effortlessly, into the soft cradle of the water. It holds you, it remembers you, and you drift, weightless, quiet, safe. The stars above turn slowly. The earth beneath hums with dreams, and somewhere, not far, the voice of an old storyteller murmurs one last time. Sleep now, traveller. You are clean. You are safe. You are home. With fresh linen on the line, candlelight flickering low, and quiet stories rising like the scent of mint from a warm basin. Each chapter will be a step further into stillness, where time dissolves and calm settles like a feather on the skin. You are safe here. Let the old world soothe you. There is a special kind of comfort in fresh bedding. Even in the medieval world, where luxuries were rare and mattresses were stuffed with straw or feathers, clean linen was cherished, especially in noble homes and monasteries. Women spent days spinning, weaving, washing. Linen was soaked, pounded, laid in sunlight, bleached with lye made from ash, rinsed in stream water, and dried on fragrant hedges. The final product, cool, crisp sheets that whispered against the skin. In many cultures, clean bedding was believed to invite peaceful dreams. There was an old Saxon belief that restless spirits avoided houses with laundered sheets, and so families made sure their beds were fresh before holy days or important harvests, as though dreams themselves could be prepared for. The rustle of linen folding, the sigh of sinking into a bed newly made, the wind passing over drying cloth in the sun. Tonight, your bed is like theirs, prepared with care. The fabric is cool, the pillow soft. You slip between the folds like a leaf on a river. You are clean. You are weightless. You are ready to dream. In a quiet village beside a river in Bohemia, there was once a tradition passed from mother to daughter, the gentle wash day. It was not only about cleaning clothes, but about cleansing the heart. At dawn, women carried bundles to the riverside, not to scrub furiously, but to soak, to rinse, and to talk. They hummed as they worked, their voices blending with the water's song. Each garment was handled like a prayer, and after the washing came the drying, then the brushing with lavender stalks, then folding, all done in a kind of moving meditation. Children napped beneath the trees, the sun warmed the rocks, and if you stood at a distance, the whole thing might have looked like a scene painted by light and peace itself. Now, imagine that you are one of them. You lift a cloth from the water, squeeze it slowly, feel the droplets fall from your fingers. You've done enough for today. Your mind is still. The world is soft again. Among the forgotten rituals of sleep was one practiced by a few quiet convents in the northern hills of Germany, something called the midnight sprinkling. Before the final prayers, just as candles were blown out and silence fell, a novice would walk through the sleeping quarters with a small bowl of rose water. She would dip a bundle of thyme into the bowl and gently flick it over the feet of the sleeping sisters. It was said to protect against fevers, bad dreams, and wandering thoughts. The scent of the roses, the whisper of the thyme leaves, the cool droplets like blessings. As you lay now, imagine those gentle sprinkles falling upon your toes. Software barely felt, but enough to make you sigh, enough to tell your body, it is time to rest. The day is washed away. You are safe, deeply, profoundly safe. In certain corners of the medieval countryside, beds were not only for sleeping, they were woven sanctuaries of scent and healing. Dried herbs were sewn into the straw of mattresses or tucked into pillows. Chamomile for calm, mint for clarity, rose petals for sweetness. There's a legend from Cornwall of a woman named Maris who wove her husband a new mattress each year using herbs gathered by moonlight. He was a knight, always restless, but in that bed he slept deeply, always dreaming of peace. Many believed that the right blend of herbs would carry you into dreams more vivid than waking life, that your soul, while sleeping, would walk through gardens you'd never seen, meadows filled with the laughter of those long gone. Your own bed now becomes that herbal nest. Each breath brings calm, each exhale a little more release. The scent cradles your mind. You are swaddled in the fragrance of 100 quiet fields. Then let us slip further still, into the gentle twilight between memory and myth, where the stories are soft, the air is fragrant, and time folds like linen across a quiet chair. Each chapter a warm cloth laid upon your brow, each word a hush. Let us dream together. In the hush of medieval bedchambers, where candlelight flickered and wooden beams creaked softly above, there lived a delicate art, the preparation of sleeping sachets, tiny bundles of herbs sewn into cloth, slipped into pillows, or placed beside beds to invite calm dreams. Women in abbeys, healers in small villages, and mothers across every class stitched these pouches by hand. Lavender, of course, but also mallow for softness of thought, meadowsweet to ease sorrow, hop flowers to quiet the heart, and valerian root to silence the mind's noise. In Florence, wealthy homes had special scented cloths, squares of silk soaked in rosewater and dried in the sun. These were folded beneath pillows or laid briefly on the eyes before sleep. It was said that the scent could carry away fear and draw in dreams where the dead whispered kind words to the living. Tonight, imagine such a sachet tucked beneath your head, its scent rising like a lullaby. Every breath draws you deeper. You are wrapped not in thought, but in fragrance, and you are floating, slowly, gently, into a dream that smells of flowers and memory. In many medieval towns, childbirth was seen not just as pain and peril, but as sacred. And so, on the eve of birth, a mother would be given a cleansing bath, not just for hygiene, but for strength. It was often done by candlelight, in silence, with only the midwife and a family elder present. The bath was warm, filled with herbs known for peace: chamomile, mugwort, balm. The midwife whispered prayers, tracing small circles in the water, as though drawing a veil around the mother to keep her safe. Sometimes songs were sung, low, slow songs about mothers from the past, about children to come, about the river that brings new life. And when the bath was done, the mother was wrapped in fresh linen, rubbed with scented oils, and laid gently in bed, her hair braided with rosemary, her skin glowing from the warmth. It was said that such a bath cleansed not only the body, but the fears tucked in the corners of the mind. Now imagine you have been bathed like this, not because you are about to give life, but because you deserve calm, because your own inner world is ready for quiet rebirth. The water soothes, the linen holds you, the candles whisper you towards stillness. You are safe. You are loved. You are more than enough. Before weddings in many parts of medieval Europe, especially in regions of France, Persia, and the Ottoman-influenced Balkans, it was customary for the bride and groom to each be bathed in a ceremonial washing. The bride was bathed by the women of her family in a basin filled with rose petals and warm goat's milk, honey, and soft herbs. She was not scrubbed, but caressed, as the women whispered blessings into her ears. Each hand that touched her wished her sweetness. Each drop of water carried a hope for happiness. The groom's bath was different, often done in silence, alone, or with a single male elder. His water was colder, bracing, perfumed with frankincense and myrtle. He was to be cleansed of wildness and prepared to protect. And after the bath, both would dress in robes of clean linen and walk toward their vows, not just adorned, but purified, quieted, made new. Tonight, you too are bathed in rosewater and soft light, not for a wedding, but for union with your own peace. Your past is washed away. What waits ahead is simple, calm, soft as silk. There is a story, told only in the deepest woods and oldest nooks of medieval Germany, of the dream house. It is not built by hands, but by longing. They say it appears only to those who are tired in a certain way, not just the body, but the soul. It appears at the edge of the forest, always at dusk, always after a long walk. It is small, made of stone and moss, with a round wooden door. Smoke curls from its chimney. The air around it smells of clean sheets, honey bread, and lavender. Inside, a bath drawn just for you, a bed already made. Candles flicker, and a soft robe lies folded by the fire. No one speaks. No one needs to. The house knows what you need. Once you lie down, the ceiling vanishes, and above you, stars. The dream house cannot be found on purpose. But if you are quiet and open and very, very tired, it may find you. And perhaps tonight, you are there, right now. As the medieval world shifted from sleepy villages to bustling towns and cities, sanitation became a new kind of challenge. Where there had once been wide-open fields and streams to carry waste away, now there were crowded alleys, overflowing tenements, and walls pressed tight against each other. But even then, there were efforts. There were rules. There was hope. In London, as early as the 14th century, officials appointed muck collectors and gong farmers, quiet workers of the night, who carried away the waste of the day. They moved like ghosts, often in silence, their carts rolling under moonlight, away from sleeping homes. There were laws, too, mandating that dung be dumped beyond the city walls, that animal entrails not be tossed into the streets, that fishmongers sweep their stalls before nightfall. Small acts of order in a world that often swelled with chaos. In Paris, water carriers trudged from public fountains to households, balancing sloshing barrels on their backs. In Florence, laundresses sang softly as they scrubbed civic cloths in the Arno. In Bruges, there were even fines for spitting in churches, a quiet attempt to keep sacred spaces pure. Even in the dirt, there was care. Even in the crowd, there were rituals of cleansing. And just like the people of those cities, you too are surrounded by a quiet order. The chaos of your day is being swept away, slowly, gently, without you needing to lift a finger. Let us linger here, in the early dawn hours of a medieval city. The market square is still empty. The air is cool, touched with mist, and from the narrow alleys come the street sweepers, broom in hand, shoulders hunched, eyes soft with sleep. They do not sing, they do not speak, they simply sweep. Dust, refuse, petals from yesterday's flower carts. Everything is moved into neat piles. The sweepers wear cloaks against the cold. Their boots tap gently on stone. Not far behind come the water bearers, men and women who rise before sunup to fill barrels from fountains and deliver fresh water to homes. Their paths are well known. Children wave to them. They nod politely, but rarely stop. These workers kept the city breathing. Their hands, rough with labor, made it possible for others to wake to clean doorsteps, filled basins and cleared walkways. Now imagine that you are there. You watch from your window. The world is being tidied just for you. Nothing is asked of you. You may rest. You may close your eyes. Outside, others tend to the order of things. And inside, you drift further into peace. Back in the home, humble or grand, the hearth was the beating heart of hygiene. Though homes were often smoky, dim, and layered in dust, there was still a rhythm, a ritual to keeping them as clean as one could. Ashes were swept from the fire every morning, always in the same direction, to carry yesterday's worries away. Floors were scrubbed with rough cloths, dipped in vinegar and water, and reeds were sometimes strewn underfoot. Rosemary and rush crushed gently beneath each step to scent the air. Housewives used scrubbing stones to polish wooden tables. Children fetched clean snow in winter to melt and rinse tin cups. Cats and dogs were brushed with twigs dipped in sweet-smelling oils. Everything was small. Everything was intentional. These were not chores. They were quiet offerings to the spirit of the home. Your home, too, can feel this sacred. Let your breath sweep through you like a broom. Let stillness settle like fresh herbs upon your inner floorboards. There is no hurry, no noise, only the quiet pulse of a clean, calm hearth. To many in the medieval world, especially monks, mystics, and healers, purity was not just about the skin or home. It was a state of being, and to reach it, one must sometimes empty oneself completely. Through fasting, the body was stripped of indulgence. Through silence, the mind was cleansed. And through ritual washings of hands, face, even feet, the soul was prepared for clarity. There are journals from anchorites, those who lived in solitary cells for prayer, describing their daily cleansing as an act of opening the self to the divine. Even the act of rinsing the mouth before prayer was seen as a symbol of washing away impure thoughts. One nun in 13th century France wrote, "I fasted for 3 days, and on the 4th I was filled not with hunger, but with light. My breath was clear, my mind like still water." For them, hygiene was more than habit. It was transformation. You do not need to fast. You do not need to be holy. But let yourself feel for a moment that same lightness, the sense that you are clean within, unburdened, drifting through soft inner skies. Breathe softly, and let us wander even further along the winding cobblestone paths of time, where every tale feels like a gentle lullaby, and every story rocks us closer toward dreams. The lantern is still lit. The past is not yet done speaking. Let us continue. When the Black Death rolled across Europe like a shadow in the 14th century, it did more than bring fear. It transformed how people thought about cleanliness. Though they did not yet understand germs, medieval people observed that filth and illness often walked hand in hand. And so, towns tried desperately to clean themselves into safety. In Venice, ships were kept at sea for 40 days, the birth of the word quarantine, from the Italian 40 giorni, meaning 40 days. In London, piles of refuse were removed from the streets, and laws forbade the dumping of waste near homes or water sources. Doctors in long-nosed masks filled with herbs walk the streets, their cloaks rustling like parchment. Households where illness struck were sometimes sealed, doors marked with a red cross, a plea for help written in chalk. But even amid panic, there were rituals of care. People burned rosemary and sage to purify the air. Lavender bundles were hung over beds. Prayers were whispered over bowls of vinegar. In some towns, processions of barefoot flagellants wandered the streets, believing the soul must be cleansed if the body could not. And though it was fear that stirred these actions, it was also love. Love for life, love for others, a yearning to keep the ones we cherish safe. Let that feeling settle gently in your chest. You are not alone. You never have been. Across centuries, others have longed for peace and health just as you do now. Beyond laws and brooms, there was something more ancient, more elemental, something that flowed through stone and story alike. Sacred water. Throughout medieval Europe, wells and springs were places of cleansing and hope. Some were said to heal fevers. Others were believed to ease childbirth or wash away sorrow. Pilgrims walked for days to bathe in them, and even if they did not leave cured, they often left calmed. In Ireland, Brigid's Well was circled with rags tied to trees, tokens from those seeking healing. In France, the fountain of Saint Foy was said to bring clarity of mind. In England, the spring at Walsingham became a sanctuary for those weary in body and spirit. Bathing in these waters was a ritual. You removed your shoes, you knelt, you let the water touch your face, your hands, your heart. Tonight, imagine such a spring, just for you. You reach it after a long walk through soft forest paths. The water is cool and clear. You dip your fingers in. You breathe. You are not just clean, you are blessed. Not every act of hygiene was solemn. Some were filled with laughter, gossip, and life. The village well was one such place, where hygiene met community. Women gathered each morning, jugs balanced on hips, children running barefoot beside them. It was here that stories were traded, songs were sung, advice was shared. I heard the baker's wife is expecting again. They say the rain will come tomorrow. My grandmother says a mint leaf in the wash water keeps the devil away. Water was drawn not just for drinking or cooking, but for bathing, scrubbing floors, rinsing hair, and just beside the well, a flat stone slab often served as a washing station. Here, linens were beaten clean, and laughter echoed as cloth slapped against stone. It was hard work, but shared, and in that shared space, cleanliness became a kind of joy. You too are standing by that well now. You are surrounded by voices you love. They are kind, they are familiar, and together, you carry peace home in a clay jug. As the sun sank low beyond the fields and rooftops, the people of the medieval world prepared not just for rest, but for cleansing sleep. In monastic houses, a soft bell would ring. Monks and nuns would wash their hands in silence, file into their sleeping quarters, and lie down fully clothed beneath woolen blankets. The scent of beeswax and cold stone lingered in the air. In village homes, children were bathed in wooden tubs before the fire, their hair dried with linen towels. Parents scrubbed their own hands and feet, wiped their faces with damp cloths, and whispered a final prayer beside the hearth. Some homes had night bowls of rosewater to be used before bed. Others hung small sachets of mint and chamomile near pillows, meant to ease the transition between waking and dream. And always the fire was banked, the door was latched, the stars outside were clear. You are lying there now, in that home of long ago, washed, warm, weightless. Sleep does not need to be chased. It is already reaching for you. And now, dear listener, as the soft hush of twilight settles in and the final echoes of footsteps fade along the old stone paths, we arrive gently at the close of our long and quiet journey. Together, we have wandered through the forgotten world of medieval hygiene and sanitation, a place not only of dirt and struggle, but of small, sacred acts of care. You've listened to the trickle of water in village wells, watched the sweep of straw brooms in cloister halls, and sat beside quiet fires where children were bathed and beds were made with love. Though the medieval world was filled with hardship, its people found beauty in simplicity. Cleanliness, even then, was a form of kindness. A cloth soaked in rosemary, a bowl of warm water, a whispered prayer before bed. These were the lullabies of a harder time. And even now, long centuries later, those same rhythms linger in your own world, in the ritual of washing your face at night, in the way you fluff your pillow, in the hush you create before you close your eyes. Let those rituals wrap around you now, like a soft blanket drawn up to the chin. Let the stories settle gently in your mind like dust in a quiet room. You are safe. You are warm. You are part of something timeless, a lineage of souls who washed, who cared, who tended to their bodies and their spaces with love. The broom has been tucked away, the lantern has been dimmed, the water is still, all is calm. Sleep, dear one. Sleep knowing that you are clean and comforted and deeply cared for, across time, across stories, across dreams. And now, we gently close the book. Thank you for dreaming with sleepy historians, where the past whispers softly and every story ends in peace. If you enjoyed tonight's journey, consider subscribing, leaving a kind word in the comments, or simply joining us again next time. Until then, rest easy, sleep well, and remember, history is always here, waiting quietly to soothe you. Good night.